So why is the budget book so complex? We break down the budget book process. In fact, we break down most reporting processes into the following stages. So we start off with data gathering. For the budget book, need to reach back out to our budget software, be that Excel or run CGI Brass, and probably dump that data out into Excel. So we gather the data from probably primarily our budget software. Maybe there's some data that we need to pull down from our ERP system as well if those aren't synchronized. Though when you think about a budget book, I suspect that there are other data sources that you need to reach out to as well. So not only ERP, but there's maybe some investment data, and we need to talk to some actuaries about, the investment income that's being projected. Let's say maybe we need to talk to HR about staffing and number of uniform police and non-uniform police, and a fair bit of detail there. And then very typically we have budget analysts that participate in this process that give us context, explanation for why we're suggesting the budget should go up by 2.6% for this program and down by 92% in this program. What are we hoping to achieve? What are the objectives? What did we do with the money last year? So significant changes last year and then intended developments this year. All that analysis work often comes from analysts. And if your budget software is really sophisticated, is good, maybe those analysts are putting that commentary text into the budget software. For many of our clients, that's not true. For many of them, they're doing that elsewhere on the side. And so we need to be able to incorporate all of that into our spreadsheets and our word processing documents. So data gathering can be problematic. Get the data down, we reformat it, and we start to build at the preparation stage the tables and the graphs. And in Word, we start to work up the narrative sections where we provide the explanation, the context. And preparation is painful for a couple of reasons. One, we need to think about our organizational standards. What font should we be using? What margins, what colors, what indents? And depending on how many people participate in budget creation, it can be like herding cats. Bob likes Helvetica and he forgets that the margin should be this, and he likes to curse in his analysis commentary. Hopefully that's not true. But that idea that we need to provide this oversight function to ensure that the whole document looks cohesive. So we're worried about organizational standards and reporting standards. The GFOA has a set of criteria, some thou shalts, in terms of your budget. You prepare your budget, you submit it to GFOA, and if successful, you are honored with their distinguished budget certificate. So they've got some reporting standards too, criteria that you must include in your budget book. So during preparation, you're probably worried about that. Typically, we then move down to the review stage. And at the review stage, we're worried about ensuring our organizational standards and reporting standards have been met, so confirming it. But then also we're worried about our formulas and our numbers. Does total revenues on page 26 agree where, on page 26, we break it down by source. And on page 86 or 186, we break it down by type. Total revenues should equal total revenues wherever it's presented. So we've got to spend time going back and forth through our budget book to ensure agreement. Can't be off by a buck, we need to agree exactly. So we hear very commonly from our clients that the review stage is particularly painful. We then move down to the finalization stage. And here we're thinking about things like the table of contents and page numbering. Do we have any page breaks that are occurring in the middle of a page? If so, we need to juggle and move that table down to the top of the next page. And then we've got a big white space at the bottom of the page above, and what are we going to do there? So that whole idea of sort of getting things I's dotted, T's crossed as we get prepared to publish. And I suspect for most of us, publishing means outputting it to PDF in one sort of final comprehensive budget document. We do have clients where they have several different budget books. They've got a summary and then they've got a detailed, or maybe they've got an amended budget, an original budget, the final approved budget. So it could go through different stages. But that idea that we need to publish our data off the back end. And so what's hidden in that process flow actually looked pretty straightforward, didn't it? It was a nice straight line. But the truth of the matter is it tends not to work that way when you're actually putting the book together. There's lots of manual intervention. So you've got tables throughout your budget book. Probably one of the first things you do is print off your budget book and take your adding machine and check to ensure all your totals are right. And then someone gets the bright idea that they want more disclosure somewhere, so they insert some rows. And then they got to go back to step one and reflip the tables to make sure that new row didn't break their totals. And then maybe they stop and do a little bit of a format review, dollar signs and underlines and fonts and indents, and they have to manually, typically, traipse through these documents to ensure consistency. It's been our experience that very rarely are finance officers, finance departments, budget offices, really leveraging themes and styles and some of the more sophisticated tools that are available in word processing tools to ensure agreement. So they find some mistakes and they reprint version 6 of the budget book. And then they go to that review stage and make sure the values from one table agree to another table, total revenues on one page to the next page, all agree. They find some mistakes and they save off a new version, they reprint. And then they get last minute changes. Maybe they take the budget to council for the first review and they require changes. So then you've got to go back, update your budget, and then go through and ensure that you catch all 926 changes throughout the budget book in tables and graphs and narrative potentially. So you reprint and then you get down the finalization table of contents, pagination, styling. At the end of this process, you're buried in 15 different printed versions of your documents and 15 or 20 or 40 different electronic versions. You probably live in fear that somebody's accessing the wrong electronic version of the document. And all of this is happening when you have probably very little time to spare. Working to tight deadlines tends to be a very common theme that we hear from budget officers. So that's the context. And let's start talking about a vastly superior solution to the spreadsheet and word processor approach. And that is CaseWare. For those of you that haven't used CaseWare, the first version of the product was released back in 1988. So we've got 30 years of continuous enhancement, improvement, and development, 500,000 users in 130 countries around the world. And there's a couple of reasons for that kind of growth and success. A big part of it is the product is specifically designed to be used, maintained, supported by finance professionals, budget officers, accountants, and auditors. In other words, you don't need an IT department to run this product. It's designed to be utilized, maintained by you. And consequently, they've developed a very sophisticated but relatively easy to use product. And that has allowed them to take over this leadership role in financial reporting and the internal control software industries globally. The two tools we're going to demonstrate for you today from CaseWare are CaseWare Working Papers and CaseWare Financials. They fit together hand in glove to give you a really robust database-driven solution for generating your budget book, generating your CAFR, generating your monthly quarterly reports. These two tools can be set to any complex reporting task you might imagine. So it's really common for us when we work with clients to tackle one of two projects initially. Either we get the call from the client that they want to tackle the CAFR, or their annual financial statements, or the budget book. Those are sort of the two heavyweights in reporting for the finance department. Very typically, once we automate one, the client realizes the opportunities that are available and they tackle the next one. But other really common reporting projects would be the MD&A section of annual reports, statistical reporting, quarterly, monthly reporting, in-year forecasting would be another very common reporting task. And other standardized, recurring, complex reports. Those are really your three criteria. If you're trying to consider whether or not CaseWare might be a good tool for a particular project. If it's recurring, if it's largely standardized, meaning the look of the report is pretty similar each time we issue it, whether that's monthly or annually or quarterly, it's not radically different. It's not sort of ad hoc reporting where I don't even know what I want the report to look like. I'm just going to dig through data and explore. If it's not ad hoc, CaseWare tends to be a very good tool. And then finally, the other thing to understand that makes CaseWare fundamentally different is we're going to give you a full automated working paper package that allows you to drill down from any number in the book. So if you've got, total salaries for the public works department, you'll be able to double click and it will drill down in CaseWare to a listing of all of the GL accounts that roll up to that total. So you're not left trying to puzzle out complex formulas to figure out why the number is what it is. And this is complete with issue tracking, document management, workflow, and a complete audit trail. So it's not just a report writer, in other words. So when we talk about the budget book, when we think about automating the budget book, there would be a number of components that we require. Again, if we're interested in the GFOA Distinguished Budget Award, we need to have these raw components, the table of contents, all the way down to departmental descriptions. And we have standard content that will allow you to meet these requirements, or we can recreate your current budget book, font, format, style, etc. Either way, whether you sort of adopt a standard presentation that we provide or whether we recreate yours, there very typically is a couple of key elements that are in most budget books. The first is there is some significant degree in many budget books of graphic content. So whether this is a picture of City Hall or kids playing in a park, or the pictures of the board or council, organization charts, there's graphic elements that we need to be able to deal with. Two, we've got tables and charts that we want to be able to automate entirely. Three, we've got often very large narrative sections that we need to deal with. And the combination of these four elements makes the budget book reasonably unwieldy. And if we think about the narrative section, we can even break this down a little bit further. Parts of the narrative are pretty standard. They don't change a lot from year to year, sort of boilerplate, like you see at the top of this example. Goals and missions and program descriptions. Then we might move down into narrative that is more variable from one issuance to the next. And we want to be able to automate different categories here. So sort of simple automation, I want to be able to sum a bunch of GL accounts to be able to give me total revenues and total expenditures, total salaries, expenditures, etc. So we want to be able to drop cells in amongst our narrative to automate that section of the book. We have more complex calculations where maybe we want to do the 5-year trend, or we want to look at, the difference between revenues and expenditures. So what is the net cost of this program to the organization, for example? We may want to automate the dates. So as the book rolls from one year to the next, we want to be able to reference different year-end dates, different year start dates, etc. So we want to be able to automate all of that as well. Now, there aren't any examples of this in my little sample here, but often we also want to drop in key performance indicators. The number of full-time equivalent employees, the number of uniformed police, the number of miles of paved highway. All of those kind of things we would categorize as key performance indicators. We need to be able to automate those too, which we can do in CaseWare. Then, as I say, finally, dates. The last sort of piece of the puzzle when it comes to narrative tends to be that analyst commentary text. So this section here, for example, maybe comes from an analyst. They prepare it in Word. We want to be able to suck that in and drop it in exactly the right place in our document. Same thing here. We want an automated way of controlling the font and the format of what's been submitted, approve it, and drive it into the right section of our book without much manual intervention. So that leads us to our demonstration. And the first thing that I want to point out to you is this demonstration assumes that the initial implementation and configuration has been done. So this is what it would be like for you to be working inside of CaseWare to do your budget book once the initial implementation has been configured. CaseWare is a database-driven application. We bump into clients very regularly in local government that are looking at alternate ways, competitive solutions to CaseWare. And we've evaluated those other products. We considered, whether or not those are better solutions or try to find the optimal solution for our client. And the problem with many of them is that they are essentially Google Docs. They are spreadsheets in the cloud. They aren't database driven. And I'm going to show you some fundamental benefits of the database approach. So here is that database being kept alive inside of CaseWare. So essentially what we do is we take your data out of your budget application and in probably about 90 seconds have that imported into CaseWare's database. And now inside of CaseWare's database, we can do some analytical review automatically. We can do analysis programmatically to find major variances, or if your budget doesn't balance, or if we have 1,000 new GL accounts. CaseWare will tell us, these are new accounts, you need to teach us where these go. All of those things, the automated validation, the automated detection of new GL accounts, are impossible when working in those sort of cloud-based or desktop-based spreadsheet solutions. And what that means is you would manually need to go and update all of your formulas in those spreadsheets. to build your book. So really, they're not fundamentally different than your current Word and spreadsheet approach today. They're just in the cloud. But here in CaseWare, we import our GL accounts, and then we're going to start to tag, explain our data to CaseWare. And here we're going to do that at least two different ways. We're using this field, which is called map number, to group our data by object, essentially. So what type of account is this? 309.100, we're saying that this is taxation-own purpose. Or 310 is fees and service charges. So we're categorizing the types of revenues and expenses that we have here. And we would do that en masse during the initial implementation. And here what we'd see is 309 is property taxation, fees and services is 310. This is all customizable, these groupings. These would be built to duplicate your roll-ups. And there's an unlimited level of depth here, so we could break it down into subcategories, .100 and .200 and so on. So step one during implementation would be to teach CaseWare about how to group your accounts by what type of account they are. The next thing that we would do at minimum is teach CaseWare how your accounts roll up, where they belong, in other words. So if I just collapse this list, you can see here that under operations, I've got general government, protective services, transportation. If I pop open protective services, I got fire and police and conservation. Under police, I might have even further breakdowns by department, by cost center. And all of this is, again, custom based on how you want your accounts to roll up. It's not custom programming. This is just part of the configuration. And so here you can see that police is 32. Well, 32 is probably part of your GL code that we detected, so that all accounts with 32 in the fifth string would automatically get rolled up into policing. We teach CaseWare what type of account it is and where that account belongs. And then the moment we've completed our import from your budget software, we've got a budget book that is populated that we can present. So we've got a draft budget book 30 seconds after you've done your import. And this is just a small section of a budget book with a sort of a rudimentary cover page. Here's our table of contents being calculated in real time. So here you can see we have our summary and introduction, and then the agency section is just fire and policing. So you can see here that gets us to page 12. And as we work our way through here, here's our graphic content, our org chart, and our picture of council, our transmittal letter, some summary information here. Here's the detail of the general fund and the graph for the general fund. And then here's the uses or the expenditures for the general fund. We've got some narrative. So the point is, the moment we import our data, once CaseWare understands your data structure, what type of account and where it belongs, it now knows where that data needs to go. If you add 100 new GL accounts, the moment you tell it what and where those accounts are, what type of account and where they belong, the budget book is immediately updated. You now do not need to spend time updating formulas in your book. So let's continue working our way through that process flow that I laid out for you earlier. So we started with data gathering, and I want to continue the discussion about data gathering. So probably 80 or 90% of the data you need to report, we're going to be able to bring in from your budget software via an Excel import. But if I go down through my book a little bit further, we're going to see that there might be some data here that we need to gather from other locations. So if I come down to the fire department area, here I'm going to just show you that these dates are being calculated and all these amounts are being calculated. You can see here the following table explains the major causes for the $1.964 million decrease. The word decrease is being calculated, and the 1.964 is being calculated based on the numbers that we imported. But we're going to imagine now that this table comes from an analyst. It wasn't in our budget software. It's the explanation for why there's a $1.964 million decrease. And really what we're saying is we're going to slash our school education program by $15 million. A couple of new programs here, but the story is largely about this school education program funding decrease. We're going to pretend that this content didn't come from our budget software. It came from an analyst. So how do we gather that data as we sort of complete the data gathering story? Well, it depends. In some cases, you may want your analyst to work directly in CaseWare. No problem, we can do that. CaseWare is effectively a word processor. So the following table explains the major causes that occurred this year. So we can type in our narrative here. We can always do that if we want to allow people to have that access. Or we can give external users an ability to submit content that we will drop into the right spot. And there's two different ways we can do that. Either they are users or they are not users of CaseWare, and that tends to drive the different approaches. So here, if I scroll down, we're going to pretend that this table was submitted to us by someone that we didn't want to be a CaseWare user. But this explanation of significant changes was provided to us by someone who is a CaseWare user. So let's look at those two different approaches. I'm going to pretend that I'm the budget analyst for the fire department, and it's my responsibility to provide an explanation for the significant changes. So this is a big deal, a lot of new stuff happening. No, that's not the wording that I want in my budget book. So what I'm going to imagine is that I am this user, and I'm going to log into my CaseWare file as that user. So here I am. I am Betty Dalmatian, the analyst for the fire department. And you're going to notice now that Betty doesn't get the full screen that you saw a moment ago. This home screen is much redacted so that she can only see those documents that have been assigned to her. So she comes into her variance discussion section, and this is the screen where she's allowed to review in summary the approved, the projected, and the variance. There's the $1.9 million decrease, and she can just give us the commentary text related to that. So we're going to say, here at the city of ABC, we think kids are smart and do not need much education. As a result, we have slashed the education program. So you'll notice here, one of the benefits is we have corralled Betty. She can only do her work in this one spot. She can't affect other areas of the book. We can do spell checking, and we can sort of control what she types here. We close out, and Betty says, I'm done my section. She highlights these documents and she signs off on them. You'll notice they appear signed off here on the right-hand side. So we have workflow going on in this document. So Betty has finished her work and she's going to close out. Bob, Ron, Jim, back in the budget office, now immediately see that that section has been completed. So we're going to log in as one of these supervisors here. And they're going to see that she has completed her work. Documents have now been signed off. And immediately, if we open up the budget book, we will see the work that she has submitted, that updated commentary text, flowing through into just the one section that she updated. So we know where it goes. There's no intervention necessary. It just flows to the right spot. And we're going to jump down to the fire department discussion. And here at the city of ABC, we think kids are smart and do not need much education. So there you can see the little red squiggle telling us that that has changed since we last reviewed this document. I can right click and I can accept that change. I'll accept all changes in this document. So that is data gathering when we want our analysts to be CaseWare users. For some of our clients, that's not the optimal flow of data. For some of our clients, they want their analysts to just complete their work in Excel or Word, and then they want us to suck that data in. And I'm going to show you that approach exactly. So I'm going to come back into CaseWare, and here we're going to go take a look at this change analysis. And essentially what we've done here is we've sucked in an Excel spreadsheet that was given to us by Bob, one of the other analysts. Let me just increase the magnification so you can see this a little better. So here you can see that this was the spreadsheet that we brought in. It was brought in April 28, 2017 by this user. And here's the analysis. Now maybe Bob calls us up and says, listen, I made a mistake. Here is my new spreadsheet. What we're going to do is we're going to go into edit mode, and we're going to say, all right, I need to re-import that new spreadsheet from Bob. All right, so clear out the old spreadsheet data. Yes, please. So it's going to take a snapshot of this data so that we can always revert back to it. And then what we're going to do is we're going to point to the new spreadsheet that Bob has given us. And here's the fire department analysis revised. The structure of that spreadsheet hasn't changed, so I can just say next, 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 and then finally go. And now you'll see that we brought in our new data. It has more rows in it than our original data did. And what Bob has tried to do sneakily is drop in an extra $100,000, actually $100 million for fire trucks. New fire trucks to expand the fleet size. So now instead of a $1 million, $1.9 million reduction in budget, Bob is trying to suggest we have a $98 million increase. We save our work, and we can see that that has flowed right through into our budget book. So we are immediately updating the budget book with the new content when it comes in from the analysts. It knew where to put it. We didn't have to mess with it at all. That's data gathering. A lot of your data, 90% of it, we're going to bring in from one system, your budget software, but we can bring in data from multiple sources. Think of CaseWare as your database, and it's the hub where we're going to connect, bring in all the data, review it, track that we've received it, sign off on it, and then have it drop into the right spots in our book. So now let's talk about preparation. And really, a lot of the preparation stage will disappear entirely for you. Once the shell, the template's been built, as you saw, the moment you do your import, the book has been updated. You don't have to spend tons of time year after year preparing your budget book. Although if there were changes, that's pretty easy to do. And let me show you how we can make changes here. I'm going to turn on some hidden columns that control our documents so you can see how this works. So here, for example, this is sources of funds, so revenues, and we're projecting property taxation, 134 million in 2015, 134,573 in 2016, proposed for 2017. It's a big reduction, 104. How is this row being populated? It's being populated by this group code. Remember we said that we bring your data in, we tag it immediately so that you can automate the calculation of your numbers. So maybe this year what we want to do is we want to break this down. I'm going to hit the down arrow and you're going to see that we can actually break property taxation down into taxation-own purpose versus in lieu of taxes. So to show you how easy it is to make modifications here, you don't have to call a programmer. We're going to right click, we're going to drop in one new row, and we're going to say OK. And then we're going to change this first row to be 309.100, taxation-own purpose. The description changes and the amounts change. And the second row, we're going to make 309.200. So you'll notice I didn't have to write formulas. I now just selected from my tagging system. And there are 13 concurrent tagging grouping mechanisms available to us inside of CaseWare. So now what I want to do is I'm going to come in and say, listen, I want to subtotal these two rows. So I'm going to come up and say, yeah, let's drop in a subtotal. So there now is my subtotal. I want to point out some other interesting pieces here that you will not find in any other application. We spend a ton of time reviewing and analyzing other products. And what you're going to find here is some unique functionality that CaseWare brings to the table. The first is intelligence, is what we would call it broadly if someone was doing this manually. And if I was talking to you, you would say to me, listen, I don't want the contributed tangible capital asset row to print because there are no balances. So we've taught CaseWare that rule. And CaseWare will automatically skip printing this row because there are no balances here. Next year, or in an amendment to this budget, if we do actually have a value, that row will turn on automatically. So I'm going to go to print preview, and what you're going to see here is that that contributed tangible capital asset row is nowhere to be seen. It's dynamically skipped. There's a bunch of other examples of this intelligence that we can bring to bear. I dropped in a new subtotal here. And what you may have noticed is it didn't break my total. CaseWare was smart enough to refactor my total so that it did not include the subtotal that I just added and the individual rows that were being subtotaled. So it's going to apply some intelligence for us to mitigate the risk of error, to speed up the development process, the production process. Now let me show you another example of this intelligence. I'm going to come down to the fire department. Do you notice here significant changes for 2017? This is where that wording that we did flows in. Do you notice that this is in blue? The blue text means it won't print, right? Why won't it print? Because we have set up some rules. And our rule said that if the percentage change in the appropriation this year is less than an absolute value of 10%, do not show this description. So in other words, you probably have rules that you apply when you build your budget book that sort of tell you, well, this is something we should talk about or not talk about. To the extent that we can understand that logic, we can build it into CaseWare. So if next year the threshold isn't 10% but 5%, we make that change here, that paragraph turns on dynamically. We can have that 5% be document-wide or just department-wide or just program-wide. We have that kind of control that we can build in here so that we don't have to spend a lot of time manually assessing. We'll take that knowledge in your head and build it into your business process. So that's a little bit about preparation. Very easy to work in here, whether we're adding more textual content or dropping in new rows or subtotals or turning on or turning off sections. That's all readily available to us. I want to talk a little bit about the review process, sort of the next stage in our life cycle of development of the budget book. So if I come back here, Fire Department Analysis, we have that content that was provided to us by the analyst. We sucked it in from Excel, right? There's a problem here. The analyst total that he gave us doesn't agree to the budget that came out of Questica or came out of CGI Brass or whatever it is that we're using. And in a manual environment, in a spreadsheet environment, you would have to detect that anomaly yourself. And if you publish it without detecting that anomaly, you might wind up looking a little bit foolish. So for example, here we said the following table explains the major causes for the $1.9 million decrease. That's the number that came out of our budget software. That's the number that should agree down here. So we can have CaseWare do that validation for us. We can teach it an unlimited number of rules. Watch what happens if I try to save my document now. The analysis of the changes in the fire department appropriation does not reconcile to the balances in your file. So it's warning us. Watch what happens if I try to print this. I think my budget book is good. Let's hit the print button. It warns me at time of printing. And in fact, if I want, we can have it prevent us from printing so that we don't look foolish. Now, obviously, that's optional. You can have it let you if you wanted to. The point is we can bring a bunch of tools to bear here. In this case, I need someone to spend some time. I can't automatically resolve this problem. So we do have tools, though. I can come in and say, add a new issue to this cell. And the issue is going to be Bob's analysis of fire DPT expenditures does not agree to budget from budget software. And what type of issue is it? Oh, it's a review note. And who should we assign it to? John Handcuffs. And here we can type in the description for what the problem is exactly, and we can specify, this needs to be corrected, and it's got to be corrected by this date if we're going to get our budget book in front of council. And by setting up the issues here in our file, what I'm going to point out is if we come back to our document manager, that home screen, you see here, I have a little red one because I've got an issue that's been flagged in the budget book. So I can clearly see across all my documents which documents have problems and issues to resolve. So no more sort of making notes on the side on an Excel scratch pad, etc. So we flagged that issue. Sometimes though, CaseWare can solve these problems for us. I'm going to show you an example of a problem that we've injected here. So here's our sources of funds. And what we said was total sources of funds 278, let's do uses of funds. Total uses of funds 243.18. Here's our narrative down below. During the year 2015, that's being calculated, the city had total actual use of funds of 243.19. You'll see that doesn't agree. Those two values should agree. And so this is the kind of thing that happens pretty regularly, right? We've got these little rounding discrepancies that we wind up having to chase through the budget book. So when we spend 300 hours on our budget book, probably a big chunk of that time is spent trying to ferret these kinds of problems out. But it turns out CaseWare can solve this for us automatically. So let me just scroll up slightly so you can see the whole table. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn on rounding relations. And you're going to see this number here change. So what CaseWare has been told is compare this number to this number. And if they're different, plug this number to ensure that the table foots and agrees. We see with other applications, those spreadsheet tools that we're talking about, they seem very slick. When we've looked at those sort of cloud-based spreadsheet applications, they seem like an excellent solution, except when you really get under the hood and start thinking about how you're going to build your book. The way they would have agreement occur is they would have you just copy and paste the formula from here up here. In other words, your subtotals in those solutions, their recommended solution is they don't actually add the rows above in their tool. They just plug the total. So if you took out an adding machine, it might not foot. And it might be by way more than $1. You have no way of knowing. So this is, in our opinion, a far superior approach to ensuring the integrity of your document. So that's a little bit about some of the review tools. We can document our issues. We've got diagnostics that will point out problems, and some of those problems we can even automatically solve. And then, of course, you get the little track changes going on here that I can clear one by one or for the document as a whole if I like. One other item that we should talk about here when it comes to that sort of review stage is the last minute change. Now, you can process changes a bunch of different ways. Maybe somebody goes into CGI Brass and books a new change, a new amendment or a change order to your budget. We can suck the updated numbers down. The budget book will dynamically update and you'll get your little red squiggles. I'm going to show you that by virtue of doing an adjusting entry here in CaseWare. We're going to book a new entry, and this one is going to be to a map number. And we're just going to take a look here and see what we want to update. So this is going to be, let's imagine that we decided that we want to reduce the expenditures in general government, let's do revenues, just for sake of argument. We want to reallocate our projection here, taxation on purpose, from the 2015 actuals taxation to payments. So we're going to move some money around here. And this is going to simulate that sort of import of new data from your GL system. Or if you like, this could be something that you do even at the CaseWare level. So we're going to say 309.100, and we're going to credit that for $125,000. And on the other side of that, 309.200, that's going to be a debit. We close, we come back into our book, and what you're going to see here is that those numbers will automatically update for us to move those balances around. So we've got that sort of immediate update happening for us. So that's a little bit about the whole review process. Now, I decide that I need to make some additional changes. We're now moving out of the review stage, we're moving to the finalization stage. So I go up to print preview, and I want another graph that I want to put in here. So first, let me point out that CaseWare is automatically calculating for us our table of contents. Currently, we have 12 pages. But someone gets the bright idea. So this is that finalization stage, right? Page numbers are being generated automatically. Headers are being generated automatically. The table of contents is being updated automatically. But I decide that in the middle part of the book, what I want to do is I want to drop in some more graphs. CaseWare comes with a content library. If you buy our standard budget book content library, CaseWare's standard budget book content library, you'll have a selection that you can choose from here. So I'm going to right click, I'm going to say I want to insert from my library some more content. And so here what you're going to see is some options for some additional graphing. So I'm going to collapse this. Budget book content, agency detail section, or summary section. And I want to drop in maybe a bar chart. So here is that pie chart that's already in there. I'm going to drop in a bar chart. And I don't know, maybe I want to insert an image, a graph that I've got right out of my budget software, my ERP system. So I can embed PDFs and I can embed images if I like. So I'm going to insert those two elements. And you'll see they just snap in, they drop in place for me. So here's this graph, and there's my bar chart. And then here's my bubble chart. And if I go back into my print preview, I'm going to point out a couple things that CaseWare has automated for us at the finalization stage. The first one is CaseWare did the pagination for me. It realized that I can't fit both of those graphs, the bar chart and the pie chart, in a single page. So it didn't drop a page break in the middle of the chart. It moved the whole chart to the next page. Same thing for my bubble chart, but I could fit the table underneath my bubble chart, so it put that in place. In other words, I can teach CaseWare for each of my sections that what I want to do is keep this section together. Do not allow a page break to drop in the middle of my table. If that's going to happen, move the whole table down. So that CaseWare can sort of automate a lot of the finalization stage for us, page numbers and table of contents, of course, but also the pagination piece. So I just come back into my print preview. If we go back to our table of contents here, there you can see we now have 14 pages on our table of contents. And I'll also just point out now, I alluded to it earlier, that idea that we can just sort of embed other documents. So here we've got the About Us section embedded as an embedded PDF, or we can have embedded images. As you're seeing here, this happens to be just an embedded image. And I can double click and point this at any image I like and have that pulled in. All right, so that takes us through the finalization stage. And then the publishing stage, file, export. I can export the entire thing to a bookmarked, fully bookmarked PDF, dump it out to RTF or XBRL. So many of you may be aware of or have heard of the Data Act, where starting in May this year, so starting now, federal grantees must provide their reporting to the federal government in an XBRL-enabled format. So CaseWare will take care of that issue for you when that occurs. Now, that's normally, federal grantees tend to be states, but there has been a lot of talk of rippling this down from the state level in various states to the local government level. So just know that you're sort of future-proofed here. What I hope you saw there was that we were able to act as a hub. CaseWare was able to, where we're going to bring in your commentary text and your investment data and your budget data. We're going to dynamically apply your organizational standards and your reporting standards and ensure they comply. And we're going to automate huge sections of data gathering and prep and review and finalization and publishing to really streamline the process. The ultimate payoff for you is saving you a ton of time, dramatically reducing your risk of error, and facilitating your achievement of, the repeatability and achieving the sort of distinguished budget award certificate, if that's something that's of interest. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a great afternoon.